If you've ever heard the word beatnik, one of the first images that likely comes into your mind is of a lanky male or female dressed head to toe in black with a beret on their head, a turtleneck, slim slacks on their body, and loafers on their feet. As well, you might also associate them with poetry and smoky jazz cafes or coffee houses. However, there is so much more to the history of the Beat generation. They were rebellious and spoke out against the way that society had changed after World War II. They were using their fashion, style, and their words to voice out against what they believed to be a world moving in the wrong direction. To find out more about the Beatnik generation, its history, and its style, keep watching. Hello and welcome to Killer Kitsch Lizzie, my weird little world where I like to knit and sew, do other crafty things, and talk about rebellious fashion. As you would have gathered from the intro, that is what this video is going to be about. And it's going to be about the Beatniks. Now, when you hear that, I think you're just envisioning a bunch of people in a smoky jazz club or a coffee house reading poetry or playing the bongos. But in fact, Beatniks were actually rebelling with their fashion. Or with their style and with their lifestyles and with their music and their poetry. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, of course, as well as their style. But before I get started, I just want to read a little blurb about what a beatnik is in case you're not aware, or you maybe have heard the word but you're just not quite sure what it is. The term beatnik was coined by Herb Caen of the San Francisco Chronicle on April 2nd, 1958. Blending the name of the recent Russian satellite Sputnik and Beat generation, this suggested that beatniks were far out of the mainstream of society and possibly pro-communist. Cain's term stuck and became the popular label associated with a new stereotype. The man with a goatee and a beret reciting nonsensical poetry and playing bongo drums while free-spirited women wearing black leotards danced. Now, that was a stereotype. There was more depth to people who were living that lifestyle than society realized. If you've ever watched a movie from the mid-1950s up to the early 1960s, you may have come across scenes that take place in bohemian-style coffee shops or coffee houses. In those scenes, you'll see poets or musicians doing some sort of beat-style poetry, spoken word, or music, and there was always bongos. Always bongos. One of my favorite movies in the beatnik style is the Jimmy Stewart and Kim Novak movie called Bell, Book, and Candle. They've been in at least one other movie together, and this was by far my favorite. Also, the whole theme of the movie is fun, and watch it. That's all I have to say. It also stars one of my all-time favorite actors, Jack Lemmon. And in this movie, he works at the coffee house, and he's part of the house band. And of course, he plays the bongos. There's one really funny scene. I'm not going to give it away. Go watch this movie. It is a lot of fun. Jack Lemmon and then the character, the ant, are probably the best part of this movie. And of course, the cat Pyewacket, but Jack Lemmon is so delightful. But before I get into the beatnik style, I do want to talk a little bit more about the history of the beatnik culture. As with many fashion trends, it is usually inspired by some culture or era or some kind of artistic inspiration. Beatnik fashion is no different at all. Firmly linked to what is called the Beat generation, it was considered a counterculture movement, and it was heavily, very heavily influenced by artists, intellectuals, and anyone off the beaten path. Today we would call them weirdos. I am happily one of those weirdos, and I probably would have fit in beautifully with that crowd. And those who usually frequented coffee houses, bookstores, jazz clubs, and very smoky underground type establishments. It was a very bohemian style culture. Toronto had its very own bohemian neighborhood. Its own counterculture was very artistically driven, and that was called Yorkville, and that was back in the 50s and 60s. Even up into the 70s, actually. If you visit Yorkville today, it is the absolute opposite of that time period, and it is also opposite, ironically, of what Beatniks stood for. It is a very shishi, high-end boutiques, like boutiques type stores, like a rich people's playground, you know, high-end condos, absolutely everything that they were against. And there was other little pockets in the city that were also bohemian, artistic-driven neighborhoods, and the other more well-known one is the Annex. And even today, actually, there are quite a few artists, actors, painters, creative types that still live in that neighborhood. It is a very creative neighborhood still. It's, you know, not anywhere like it was back, you know, the 50s, 60s, and 70s, or even 80s, but it's definitely still a neighborhood that would have those types, as well as a lot of intellectuals, because it is right near University of Toronto, and yeah, no, it still has a lot of that feel to it. Every major city in like the UK and North America had its own beatnik culture, neighborhoods as well. London and San Francisco, as well as New York City, are prime examples of that. And of course, New York City is where it all began. So beatniks were considered like rebellious. They were rebels. And they were rebelling against society. They were rebelling against what society had become since World War II. As with many artists over the centuries, they rebelled through their art. The beatniks were rebelling against conformity and materialism and the new American way. So, you know, as after World War I, there was a huge time of prosperity. After World War II was no different. There was like lifestyles changed, people became more materialistic. You know, that whole keeping up with the Joneses, which, I mean, in the 1920s, it actually came around and kicked everyone in the butt because we had the crash in 1929, but of course that was then due to not having regulations over banking and trading and things like that. By the end, you know, after World War II, that was all firmly established, and people's money was safer, but just like the 1920s, it was a lot of people buying on credit. Credit cards became very popular in the 1950s, and you know, as I said, it was the keeping up with the Joneses, you know, having the house, having the car, having the wardrobe, going on the vacations. You know, the husband went to work and worked at a job that he probably started at in his early 20s and worked for the rest of his life. The wife was, the woman was at home, raising kids, keeping the house, that kind of thing. It became a very traditional style family. And beatniks were totally rebelling against that as well, on top of, you know, the materialism and all that stuff too. Also, through their art, they were finding ways to liberate themselves from this conformity, and it was very important for them to do that. During this time, several writers and artists became very well known, and they are still very popular to this day. Writers such as Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, and William S. Burroughs are considered to be key figures in this movement. If you've read any of their work, you will definitely see a very strong message about fighting against conformity. It is very clear in all of their poetry and short stories and articles, all of that. Other important poets, writers, and artists of that time would be E.D. Parker, Ted Jones, John Asbury, and Ruth Weiss. And I highly recommend that you look up all of them. As I mentioned above, the huge part of the beatnik culture was the poetry scene and the music scene. Here in Toronto, I was part of both of those scenes. I was a spoken word artist. I've had my pieces along with fiction short stories published in several literary magazines here in Canada, and short stories more published in the United States in compilations. I also ran a cabaret called Lizzie Violet's Cabaret Noir, and I'll talk about it a little bit in a second, but I was also part of the whole poetry scene, running shows, usually in collaboration with a few other artists. We would run different types of poetry nights and mini festivals and things like that. But Lizzie Violet's Cabaret Noir, it was a mix of a whole bunch of different things, like a typical cabaret. There was music and poetry and magic acts and a whole bunch of different variety of show tunes and you name it, right? And I ran that for several years. And I was, at that time, friends with a lot of bohemian-style artists and writers. I still am. That didn't go away. But I have since actually left that scene. I've moved on to other artistic endeavors, and when I moved away was when the pandemic started, and I just never went back to it afterwards. It took a while for that scene to sort of ramp up again, but I just never went back to it. I've moved on to other things. But one particular artist I want to just briefly talk about was, and anyone who knows him will totally connect with what I'm saying. That person was Nik Beat. His name is Beatnik, but backwards. That's not his real name. Nik Beat is not his real name. He was a well-known artist, musician, and poet. He also ran a weekly show called Howl on CIUT. When, unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago, very sadly. It was a huge loss for our community. Since then, another poet, Valentino Essenza, has taken over the show. They were really great friends, and it was like, it made sense that Valentino took over. But Nik released a few different books of poetry. He was so incredibly talented. It wasn't just, that's not just the reason it was such a huge loss for the community. He was such a supporter of artists. It didn't matter what type of artist you were, what level of artist you were at. He strongly supported you. He had you on his show. I was on his show a few times. He talked about you on his show. He promoted your work, came out to your shows. He was an incredible supporter. He was an incredible influence. And when I started thinking about writing the script for this particular video, I started thinking a lot about him. It was really shocking when we found out he had passed away, and it hit our community very hard. And if you talk to anybody about him today, you could still see that we are grieving his loss. And I just wanted to mention him as part of this because Nik Beat was a true beatnik. He brought that from the 50s and 60s. That feel from that time he had in this time, and he is truly missed. But as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about the beatnik style, and as I do, I'm going to put up clips and photos and whatnot as I talk about this subject. Beatnik style was a combination of a few different looks. Both men and women embraced the style wholly, and one of the reasons was its simplicity. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me just tell you a little bit about what beatnik style is, and not what the stereotype is, rather actually what it was. Beatnik style was popular at its height towards the end of the 1950s, and usually described as very minimalist, intellectual, and very androgynous. Men and women tended to wear very similar styles. This look would include mostly black clothing. Occasionally another color would pop in, but it was mostly white. You wouldn't see bright colors usually, or patterns or anything like that. And it would be a mishmash of turtlenecks, skinny tight pants, similar to the skinny jeans we'd wear today, ankle-length capris, and the footwear was always comfortable. During that time, female beatniks would not wear heels at all. It would be like loafers or ballerina-style shoes, that kind of thing. They would steer away from high heels and uncomfortable, fashionable shoes. Another well-known and very popular beatnik style is the long sleeve top, the striped version also. And it would be either a turtleneck or in the Breton style. And the Breton style usually had a round neck or was a boat neck shape. Along with berets as headwear, you would almost always see beatniks wearing sunglasses. Didn't matter if it was the daytime or the nighttime or in a dark club or dark coffee house, someone was wearing sunglasses. And they were definitely not sun worshippers at all. Women's hairstyles tended to be long and straight with bangs, similar to the bangs I have. A variation of the Betty Bang, and that was very popular in the 1940s, made popular by Betty Page. So their hairstyles were very similar to that. And men usually had longish hair with beards, and both of those things were kind of a society no-no. Men were supposed to keep their hair short, and maybe a mustache was okay, but like beards were not fashionable in society at that time. And a lot of the times, as part of the stereotype, unfortunately, their beards would be like styled into goatees. I read a bunch of articles about this when I was doing my research. I am going to link them below in the show notes, as well as my blog post over on my website. And I have a video or a couple of videos about capsule wardrobes. The beatnik style would also make another fabulous capsule. I'm on a capsule wardrobe kick, I swear. I feel like I need to just have a couple of mini capsule wardrobes to mix and match with everything in my closet. And this also screams to my black clothes goth heart, and it's just a style I've always loved. I have a ton of berets, so I don't need any more of those, but yeah, I just loved the very minimalist style, and it was an easy thing to wear, and it was comfortable, and mostly I loved that lifestyle. I loved the artistry and the way they rebelled against society with their words, whether it be poetry or music. how they pushed really hard back against conformity and against materialism and against this sort of almost robotic lifestyle of the keeping up with the Joneses, this is how your life should be. Grow up, go to school, for the men mostly, still at this point, not women, but get a job, again, for the men. Have that career, the same career your entire life. Buy a house. Have 2.5 children. Have a car. Cut your grass, every other day. Go on vacations. Go to the cottage. Like, there was a very specific lineage of how your life was supposed to be. And that's really not how life should be. You should be living life to the fullest. You should be experiencing. You should be trying new things out. You should be grasping on to art and music and movies and the outdoors and move through life learning. And this is what they were about, especially the intellectual part of them. They were always wanting to educate themselves. And beatniks are a good example of a positive way society should go. So, that is it for the beatniks, and I hope you learned a little bit about what they really were. They were a culture that was rebelling, and they had a fabulous style. So if you like this type of video, please give me a thumbs up and let me know below, as well as, did you know what a beatnik was prior to this video? Have you in the past been a beatnik? Do you currently dress like a beatnik? I see a lot of vintage girls and guys out there on social media that have lovingly grasped onto this look, and that is their style, and I love it. They're probably some of my favorite social media accounts out there. And yeah, please comment below if you are not subscribed. I would love it if you did. I also have a subscriber membership driven Patreon where I'm teaching you how to draft your own clothes. Right now we are doing the Haslam system of dress cutting as a method of drafting your own clothes. Eventually, once I feel like everyone is comfortable with using that system, I'm going to move on to a different type of drafting, draft at home system, and that is basically the theme, part of the theme of what we do over there. So I'd love it if you joined up for that, because you're going to learn a lot of amazing skills. And as I mentioned earlier, the full-length version of my show notes are over on my website, which is killerkitschdesigns.com. There'll be a full blog post with all the links to everything, some photos, and all that jazz. So until next time, get your beatnik style on and stay kitschy. Bye!